Welcome to the last part of what is a sew along for the Tadah Patterns street jacket. And I just wanted to give you a little bit of an intro in case you've stumbled upon this video and you're thinking, where's the other part of this sew along? So what happened was we started a sew along in our Facebook group, and when I looked at the recordings after I'd done the sew along, the quality was really terrible. So I thought I would do the second half of the sew along here on YouTube. So that's where you are now. But you've missed the first part. I'll give a brief little intro to that at the start of this one. And I'll also direct you to our welt pocket tutorial, which you can find on our YouTube channel. And then this is the last part of how to sew your Tadah Patterns street jacket. I hope you enjoy it. Okay, so let's get into the sewing part of this. As I mentioned, this is the end of a sew along that was started in our Facebook group. And then because of some tech issues, we've now moved it to YouTube. So the first half is missing, but the first half, luckily, was all the easy steps. So we constructed the back of the street jacket. So all you needed to do for that was attach the back side pieces to the back middle piece, right sides together. Then we pressed the seam allowance out towards the side seams and then top stitched. After that, we attached the back yoke by placing that right sides together, stitching it together. Then we pressed the seam allowance up and top stitched again, and that's the back of the street jacket done. The front of the street jacket is a little bit trickier, but basically what you do is create your middle panel first. So we did that by folding over the edge of this piece and top stitching it. Then we attached it to the button lining, which you can see a little sneak peek of there. We then attached the side and the center front by placing them right sides together with the center piece. And then we pressed the seam allowance to the outside again and top stitched. Then we created our little button flap here and attached the top yoke. So we sandwiched the flap when we sewed the yoke to the main front piece, and then we top stitched that as well. And finally we created our little welt pockets here, and the welt pocket tutorial is actually on our YouTube channel, so I'll link that down in the description below and you can follow along how to do this cute little welt pocket. And as you can see, I've got floral lining in there. This is what it looks like from the underside, and what we're going to do now is attach our button placket to the front here. So to do that, we need our little button placket piece, which is going to attach there. And see this little notch here? The notch side is the side that we are going to fold over first. So I'm just going to grab my iron and we're going to fold the notched side 3/8 of an inch or 1 centimeter. So I've just got my little hemming ruler here so that I can measure it. Now, if you are like me and you've used a friction pen to mark your little cross there, just be careful that you don't iron on it, because as we all know, the heat is what makes that disappear. So we don't want our cross to disappear. So I'm just going to make sure I don't iron on the cross as I press this side. And you want to be somewhat accurate when you're doing this. I say somewhat. You want to be quite accurate when you're doing this because as you will see as we get further along, we're going to stitch this down on the right side. So you won't actually be able to see your placket fabric when you're stitching. So we're relying on this being accurate to make sure that we are catching it in our stitching later. So now that we've done that, we are going to pin this onto the front of our street jacket. So we're just lining up the raw edges here. And this next step is, it seems a little bit unusual when you're doing it for the first time, but as you get further along in the construction, it will all make perfect sense to you. So where we're going to sew is straight up here, then we're going to pivot in the corner here, and we're going to go across to the cross and then straight up from the cross. So I'm going to do that now and show you what it looks like. So I've gone straight up the side there. When I get 3/8 of an inch from the top, I'm going to turn and pivot, and I'm going straight across to that cross there. When I'm right on the middle of the cross, I'm going to pivot again and sew directly up to the top edge here. Now it's hard to see with my white stitching, but hopefully you can see the stitching there goes across and then straight up. Now I'm going to clip my corners. So I'm going to clip straight across this corner here, and then I'm going to cut into that corner there where the cross is. Just be really careful that you don't actually cut your stitches when you do this. So straight into that corner, and we are going to turn this floral fabric to the wrong side. And just grab a blunt object so that you can push out that corner there. Okay. And then we will press. As you can see, we've created this little L shape here. That's where our collar is going to attach. So that's exactly what we want it to look like. Now for this next step, we're going to top stitch this button placket down. And because we want our top stitching thread to show on the right side of our garment, we are going to sew it with this side up. So before doing that, I'm just going to pin it in place. If you've got a welt pocket on your jacket, make sure your pocket pieces, your lining is tucked under the button placket for this step. That's what you need to do to make sure it's all caught and you get a nice neat finish. So what I usually do is pin from this side to make sure I've got all those layers in the right spot. And then once I do, I flip it over and transfer my pins to the right side of the fabric. Now, once you've got that done, this next step I think is the most important one to get your top stitching perfect on this. Grab my little hemming ruler and I measure exactly how far across I want my stitching to be. So I'm measuring where the edge is and going back about 1/8 of an inch. Now I'm checking that it's even all the way along, and then I'm going to measure that on the right side of the fabric and mark it with my pen. So this is giving me a line that I can sew along with my top stitching to make sure I'm going to have a perfect top stitch on the front here. So once I've done that, I just join them all together with my ruler to give myself a guide. Okay, now I'm going to go to my sewing machine and I'm going to top stitch all the way along there. So as you can see, that's my button placket done. And if I turn it over, you can see that I've caught the lining perfectly down here. My welt pocket's tucked in there neatly. And from the front, I've got that beautiful top stitching thread. And this front piece is finished now. So we're ready to move on to the sleeve. One of the things that really sets this pattern apart is the two-piece sleeve, which gives this pattern a really professional finish and makes it look just like a store-bought denim jacket. So the sleeve comes in two pieces. There's the bigger piece, which is the upper sleeve, and the smaller piece, which is the lower sleeve. And both of your pattern pieces, you should have transferred these two markings. So we're going to use those markings first, and we're just going to clip a little line that goes directly across here from the top of this little bit that juts out, straight across the top and to that little marking that you transferred from your pattern piece. So we're going to do that on both of the sleeve pieces, the upper and the lower, cutting straight to that little marking there. The next thing to do is you're going to grab your iron and we are going to fold over this little bottom piece here. That's going to become your sleeve placket. So we're going to fold that over 3/8 of an inch and press it. Then we'll fold it another 3/8 of an inch and press again. So that's the upper sleeve done. So you'll see that when you've finished doing that on your upper sleeve, you will now have an indented placket on the upper sleeve. So now we'll do the lower sleeve. So again, you're folding it over 3/8 of an inch first, and then another 3/8 of an inch, press, and you'll see that this one, after you've done your double folds, this finishes flush. So I'll hold them together. You can see the lower sleeve here after you've folded is flush with the raw edge there, and this on the upper sleeve is indented. And what we're going to do now is we're going to sew from the right side 2 rows of top stitching on each of these. So the first row of top stitching will be as close as you can to the folded edge there, and then another row of top stitching that's 1/4 of an inch in from that first row of top stitching. So we're going to do that on both the upper sleeve and the lower sleeve pieces. So that's the first one done. Now I'm going to do the next one. This one's a little bit harder to see, but hopefully you can tell that there's 2 lines of top stitching there. Now our next step is to sew these 2 sleeve pieces together. So we're going to pop them right sides together, and if I pull this back you can see the 2 little extra pieces there, the little flaps. We're going to be sewing those together. So we'll start right down here where our 2 crosses were, and we're going to be sewing up to the sleeve head up here. So I'm just going to pin those together. And we're sewing that with a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, and we're sewing from here all the way up to the sleeve head. Now that that's sewn, I just need to finish this edge with my overlocker, so I'll quickly do that now. Okay, overlocking is done. So the next step is that we are going to press our seam allowance towards the upper sleeve. So I've got my sleeve laying out there. The seam allowance is towards the upper sleeve, and I'm going to press that seam right there. Now when you're pressing this, it might feel like your sleeve is a little bit wonky. It's actually not. It's just that this seam here is not completely straight. It's not a straight edge that you're connecting there. So it feels like it's a bit wonky, but it's not. Now, what the aim of the game here is to have these 2 pieces laying directly on top of each other. And we're going to top stitch this now, and we're going to try and top stitch so that our stitching connects onto this top stitching here from the sleeve placket. So that's what I'm going to do now. And I find when I'm doing this, it's easier for me if I've got these pinned together in the right position so that they don't move. So I'm going to top stitch really close to the edge there, about 1/8 of an inch, and then 1/4 of an inch from the first top stitching line, and trying to join up with these 2 top stitching lines down here. So let's do that now. So I'm actually going to start on those lines because I think that makes it easier to line it all up. So I'm starting exactly on the top stitching from the button placket, and I'm going to sew to the sleeve hem, the sleeve head. Okay, there's my top stitching done. very hard to see the brown on brown, but hopefully you can tell there's 2 lines of top stitching, and when we get down to the end here, you almost can't see where the top stitching of the placket ends and the sleeve top stitching begins. So I've joined them up exactly there. Now the next step is to sew a little bar tack right here. And that's just to keep this bottom flap here of your sleeve placket in place, so that if your kids are a little bit rough with their jackets, it won't pull apart at this seam here. So just a little bar tack that I sew right there on the top of the sleeve placket. So I'm going to do that now. And to do so, I use my buttonhole foot, and I have a bar tack option on my machine. But if you don't, you can just sew a little line of really narrow and a short stitch length zigzag. It does exactly the same thing. Okay, so this is what your bar tack would look like. Can you see that there? It's just a little row of zigzag stitching that's securing everything on the other side so that it doesn't come undone. So now that we've done that, we've got our 2 sleeves finished, we're going to assemble our jacket. Okay, so first step in your jacket assembly is to lay your back of your jacket with right sides up, and then you're going to place the front jacket on top with right sides down and match those shoulder seams. So we're sewing the shoulder seams together first. So I will pin those together. All right, so we're sewing those with 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Now that our shoulders are sewn together, we need to overlock them, so I'll go and do that now. Okay, overlocking is done. Now we are going to press and top stitch our shoulder seams. So I'll grab my pressing mat again, and we are going to press the seam allowance towards the front of the jacket. So the seam allowance is being pressed towards the front on that shoulder, and again on this one. And now we are going to top stitch our shoulder seams. So we're going to top stitch, I'll be top stitching at the front here on the cream. And again, it's 1/4 of an inch from the edge, and then 1/8 of an inch from the edge. Okay, so since I have sewn my sleeves, I ran out of top stitching thread. So I thought this would be a great opportunity to show you how to use 2 spools of thread to create like a faux top stitching thread. So I'm getting a 2nd spool of thread, same color as the first one I've got there. And I've got my 2nd spool holder for my machine that I'm just going to pop on there. Pop this on the spool holder there. And I'm going to grab both threads. I'm going to start this one again. Okay, so grab both threads, one from each of the spools. So I've got both threads there, and I'm going to feed them through the machine at the same time. So I've got 2 threads going through all of the usual threading pathways on my machine, and both going through the eye of my needle together. Okay, so I'm ready to top stitch. Gonna, okay, this one's being a bit of a pain. Let's try it that way. So I'm just making sure they're all feeding through nicely without getting caught. And now I'm going to top stitch with these 2 threads in, and I'll show you what it looks like. Okay, so here is my top stitched shoulder seam, and that's with the 2 spools of thread for the top stitching. As you can see, this one down here, this one down here, regular top stitching thread. Up here, that's the 2 spools of thread that I've put through my machine. Okay, so next step is to attach our sleeves. So to do that, we're going to lay out the jacket in front of us and grab our sleeve. Now, let's see, which sleeve do I need? This sleeve. So the notches on your sleeve head are going to tell you which side is the front. So the side that has all the notches on it is the front of your sleeve. The first notch that you'll see is the shoulder sleeve, the shoulder seam. So we'll attach that first. And then the next one that you'll see is where the yoke joins the bottom portion of the front of the jacket. And then the third notch marks, it matches to the notch that was on your armhole opening. Mine's come off because of the ironing, because it was in friction pen, but that's okay because I know where it would have been. So I'm just going to pin my sleeve to the sleeve opening, and then I'll pin the back of it as well. And then we're simply going to sew it on. So I find when attaching sleeves in general, usually I will attach the shoulder point, then I'll attach either end, and then I'll ease in the rest of the sleeve. Because you're joining two curves that are in different directions, one concave and one convex, it can be a little bit tricky at times. So you just got to take it slow and gently ease all of the fabric in. And there we go. So that's ready for us to sew. So we're simply going to sew around the top of the sleeve head there with 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. When I'm attaching sleeves, I always take it really slow and make sure I'm constantly using my finger to slide along the fabric here to make sure that there's no little pleats or creases in the underneath layer. So go nice and slow, constantly readjusting and feeling along there for any little pleats or creases. And when you get to points where you are sewing over the seams, where there's multiple layers of denim, it can get a little bit tricky. This is where it's really important to have a denim needle in your machine and just take it slow, particularly over those parts. Okay, that's our sleeve attached. I'm just going to go and overlock that edge now. Okay, that's one sleeve attached. So we've got one side done. If we flip it over, you can see that our jacket is really starting to take shape now. So I'm going to go ahead and do the other sleeve in exactly the same way. And that's the second sleeve done. So our next step is to sew our side seams. So I'm going to lay my jacket down with right sides up. This is the back of the jacket. Here are my two front pieces. And I'm just going to fold the front pieces over so that we have right sides together and line up those side seams. You can see my side seams there. and another one over here. And this is a great place to put in your side flag labels. So I am using this little Tadah label. It says I am unique on one side and I am not perfect on the other. This is one of my favorite labels because I think it just sums up handmade perfectly. Every piece is unique and not a single one of them is perfect, and that's what we love about handmade. But if you have a business and you've got your own branding labels, this is a good spot to sew them in. So you just pop it into the side there when you are lining up your side seam. So I'm going to sew this side first, and I'm just going to line up the underarm seams there, and I put one seam going one way and one going the other way, and that's just to reduce the bulk. So you can see one seam allowance is going down and the other seam allowance is going up, just to reduce the bulk when I'm sewing that seam there. And then we are going to pin together all the way from the bottom of the sleeve here towards the underarm, which I've just done. So the underarm there, and then we're pinning down to the bottom edge of the jacket here. I'll pin that, and then I will pin here where my label is. And I've got my label positioned so that when I sew with my seam allowance, I'm not going to cut off any of the words on there. When I get to the label, I'm just making sure that it's all nice and straight because we don't want a wonky label. Now we all know that unpicking top stitching thread is, overlocking thread is the worst thing ever. So I'm just going to make sure my label is in the right spot before I overlock. And I'm happy with that. How cute. I'm not perfect. I am unique. I love it. Okay, I'm going to overlock this side seam now. Okay, that side seam is now finished. So I'm going to do exactly the same thing with my other side seam. Two side seams done. So this is the inside of our jacket. And I'm going to turn it right sides out now so you can see how cute it is looking. It's actually starting to look like a denim jacket now. There we go. Cute. All right. So next we are going to be putting on the collar, the sleeve hems, and the hemband. All right, time for us to prepare our collar. So we need to get our two collar pieces. I am doing one piece with the brown denim, and then the underside of the collar is going to be with this floral fabric. So the first thing that you need to do is to fold over this bottom edge of the collar on your outer piece. So like I said, this is going to be the main visible part of my collar, this brown denim. So I'm going to fold the bottom edge over 3/8 of an inch, and I'm just going to press it. Now this bottom edge is a curve, so it is a little bit tricky to fold over consistently, but what I do is I eyeball it first to get the folds, because I find that I can do it with a smoother curve if I just eyeball it. And then I grab my hemming ruler and just check if I was accurate. And if there's any parts, look at that, perfect. If there's any parts that aren't quite right, then I will just get my iron and adjust those parts. But wow, I've impressed myself with that one. So now that it's all right, I'm just going to give it an extra press. And then once we've done that, we're going to sew our collar pieces together. So I'm now going to flip this over so my right side's facing up, and I'm going to put the right side of my under collar on top. I'm just going to pin it. Sorry, I might pin it from this side actually, because I I'm going to be sewing with this side facing up. So I'm just going to pin the two together. Like I said, this is right sides together. And we are going to sew along the two short edges. So these two edges and across the top of the collar there. Now when you are sewing this, that folded edge that we just created down here, we're not going to unfold it when we sew. So we'll sew over the fold, up into this corner, pivot across the top, and then back down here again over the fold. Okay, as you can see, I have sewn, pivoted in the corner, and then down here, I have sewn it over the folded edge. So now we're going to clip the corners of our collar, and then we are going to turn it right sides out. When you're clipping, get as close as you can to that stitching, but make sure you do not cut it. So we're now going to turn our collar right side out, and we'll give it a press. I'm just using my my clip and glide here, the point of it, to poke out those corners of the collar. You can use a blunt pencil if you prefer, or you might have a hump jumper or a point turner. Any of those work fine. Just make sure it's not anything too sharp, or you might actually stab through your fabric. And we don't want that. So once you've got your corners pushed out, just pop it on your ironing board, and we're going to press that I kind of roll the edge between my fingers to make sure I've got it all the way out. As I've mentioned before, I like to use a lot of steam when I'm working with denim. I just find that you get a lot crisper folds and edges when you hit it with a lot of steam. Okay, so now that I've pressed my collar, it's time to attach it to the jacket. So to do this, we are going to start from one of these edges here at the top of our placket. Now, one thing I did do then was I accidentally ironed one of my notches, and I've made it disappear because it's the friction pen. So I'm just going to fold this over to find where that notch should have been. And I will mark it again because we need that notch. Okay. That notch is going to tell us where the shoulder seam attachment is. So I'm going to pop that on first and just pin it in place. So I'm pinning the lining of the underside of the collar to the shoulder seam. And then we're going to attach this part of the collar here, the very edge, and it should be folded over now, the seam allowance from when we just pressed it. And we're going to pin that so that it's lined up exactly with the edge of your front of your jacket there. Now I'm going to ease the collar in and pin that. There we go. Now, one thing I should have done before, actually, I usually fold my collar in half and mark the midpoint of the collar. So I'm just kind of doing that now. And then I mark the midpoint of the back of my jacket as well, so I can match those up. So it's much easier to do this before you've started attaching your collar, but that's okay. So we'll do that now. I'm matching my midpoint of my collar to the midpoint of the back of the jacket. And then I'm just going to continue pinning collar to jacket all the way around the neckline. When we get to the other end, again, we're going to match that notch on the collar to the shoulder seam of the jacket. And that folded edge of the collar to the folded edge at the front of the jacket here, the edge of your placket. And that's why we created that funny little notch at the end of the placket there, so that you'll see once we sew our collar on, that little bit there disappears into the collar. So just finish pinning this, and then one more. Okay, so my collar is all pinned on now. We're ready to sew this to the jacket, so I'll do that now. And when you're sewing it on, just again make sure that your two ends are exactly lined up. That'll give you the neatest finish on your collar. Make sure you keep checking that the outer collar is pulled out of the way and that all of the layers here underneath are staying nice and flat. Because we're sewing a curve, just like when we did the sleeves, it's a good idea to run your finger along your fabrics to make sure that the bottom fabric is staying nice and flat. So make sure you pull your little bit of the collar here out of the way so that you can sew those on without catching any of the outer collar in it. We're almost done. When I get to the end here, I just fold the outer collar out of the way there to make sure it's not going to get caught, because when we are sewing this last bit, we want to be catching just the under collar, the floral fabric there, and not the outer fabric. So just carefully hold it out of the way while I sew this last little bit. Okay, so the collar is now attached to the jacket, as you can see. So our next step is to grab our iron again, and we're just going to fold this collar over so it encloses all of those raw edges there. So you can see that's my under collar, and I'm going to tuck all of those bits under and fold my collar over the top. Now on these little edges here, you can trim your seam allowance here just a little bit to take a little bit of the bulk out of that corner. Just be really careful that you don't cut through your stitches. So we're going to tuck all of that in now and iron it in place. Now as you're doing this, just kind of gently pull apart to make sure that your lining is laying flat. So as you can see, we are hiding all of those raw edges under there and pressing the collar down. So now I'll do this side, and then we're going to pin it and then top stitch it. Now this is a great spot to pop in a little size label. If you would like to do that, I might go and grab mine now. Okay, so I've got my little size label here that I'm going to add to my jacket. I'll just turn it around now and make sure my collar's laying flat. Now I'm going to pop this just in the center back of my collar. So just here, slide it under there and pin it in place. That's a bit wonky. If you're looking for size labels, we do sell them in the Tadah shop, along with every other kind of label you can imagine, woven labels, faux leather labels, which you'll see me sewing on a bit later. So what I'm doing now is I am pinning my collar in place. So just pinning along where we've just ironed. And what we're going to do next is we are going to top stitch the collar. So we're going to first go along this edge to close that open edge there. And then we're going to continue around the collar to top stitch the entire thing. So all of that is done 1/8 of an inch from the edge, all the way around all 4 sides. Let's do that. Okay, so we've just finished enclosing that open edge, and now I'm going to pivot. Actually, I think I need to do one more stitch there, and then I'm going to go around the entire outside edge of the collar. I have now gone around the entire edge of my collar. This is what it's looking like from that side. Here's how it's looking from the underside. And when you fold your collar over, you'll see that our jacket is looking much more like a denim jacket now, with our little size label there in the middle. Now we are ready to attach our sleeve hems. So our first step with the sleeve hems is to press one of the long edges. So I've got to make sure they're both right sides down. It's hard to tell sometimes with denim fabric. At first glance, they look like the sides are the same, but they're definitely not. So you can see on this one, the diagonal ridges here, that's the right side of the fabric. On the other side, although you can see very soft diagonal lines there, it's much more subtle. So this side here with the more obvious ridges is the right side. So I've got both of them right sides down, and what we are going to do is first fold it in half. No, I'm pressing this just so that it stays in place. It's not a proper press, it's just a little gentle press. And now we are going to fold one long edge up 3/8 of an inch. So I'm just going to grab my hemming ruler to make sure I've got that done accurately. So 3/8. Oops, dropped that. I'm just going to press this and then I'll check it like I did with the collar previously. Okay. So we press that side up. Like that. And then we'll do the other one. Now the next thing to do is we're going to sew along the short edges, and just as we did with the collar, we are going to do this with the bottom edge still folded up. So we're not unfolding that edge that we just pressed. We are going to sew over that fold, just like we did with the collar. So I'm going to do that for both of my hem bands now. Now that that is done, we are going to clip these corners, and then we're going to turn our hem bands right sides out. So clip those. And again, I'm going to use my Clover clip and glide to push out the corners, but you can use any blunt pen or your point turner, anything really. Just push those corners out, and then we are going to press that. Just make sure when you're doing this that that folded edge stays 3/8 of an inch away from the raw edge below it. So this gap here between the two should be 3/8 of an inch. Okay, we've got 2 hembands ready to attach. So I'll grab the sleeves. So to do this, you are going to start with your upper sleeve, which is the bigger piece. Oops, sorry, you can't see that. We're going to start with our upper sleeve, which is the bigger of the 2 sleeve pieces. So if you remember when I constructed the sleeve, I did cream was my lower sleeve, which is the smaller piece, and the brown is my upper sleeve, which is the bigger piece. So we're going to start by attaching this edge to the very edge of my upper sleeve placket. So I will pin that there. And then, oops, I'm going to then follow around the sleeve hem, pinning the hemband on as I go. So it's a bit tricky on the smaller sizes because it is a small sleeve, but just gotta go slow, be careful, as with all things with sewing. Go slow, be careful. Now, when we get to the end of our sleeve, you'll see that it doesn't match up perfectly with the edge of the other side of the placket. Can you see that? There's extra on the hemband, and that is intentional. That is not an accident or a mistake. You haven't cut anything wrong. That's what's meant to happen. So there will be a little bit of extra hemband coming off the end. That is totally fine. So now what we need to do is sew around here, sewing the hemband to the end of the sleeve. Now just be really careful when you're doing this that you don't have any of the other pieces of the sleeve caught underneath. Particularly if you're doing the little sizes, like baby sizes. It's a very small sleeve that you're working with. So just be really careful, constantly checking and moving the under fabric out of the way if you need to. Okay, when you get to the end here, just make sure your folded edge of the sleeve hem band is folded out of the way, just like we did when we ended the collar. You just want to make sure that's out of the way and you're only sewing through those 2 layers that you're meant to be sewing. So our hemband is now sewn on to the bottom of our sleeve. And now I'm going to do the exact same thing with the other one, and then I'll show you the next step. Okay, our hembands are now on. We just need to finish them. So as you can see here, it's all sewn onto my sleeve. Now I'm just going to turn the hemband right side out, and we're going to tuck in all of those raw edges. It's the same technique that we used. I'm just trimming these edges here. Get rid of some of that bulk. It's the same technique that we used on the collar. So again, we're going to tuck in all of those raw edges and then press our sleeve hemband in place. So I hope you can see what I'm doing there. I'm just tucking all of those in and folding the hemband over so that it's got its wrong sides together. Can you see that there? It's enclosed all those raw edges. So I'm going along the sleeve hemband, pressing it down the whole way along. I'm going to trim these little bits here again so that I can tuck them under. Now when you get to the end here, remember that there is that little bit of extra hemband that you need to press. That's the little extra bit that your buttons will go on when you're doing all the little finishing touches on your jacket. So I'm going to pin this very carefully so that it's all going to stay in place. And then we are going to top stitch the hemband in a minute. So as you can see, my hemband is now all ready to go. So the next step is to top stitch your hemband, and I like to do this, or you need to do this with the right side facing up so that your top stitching thread will show. So I just transfer those pins that I just put in to the right side of the fabric so that nothing will shift while I'm sewing. So once I have done that, just like with the collar, we are going to top stitch around this entire thing. So I'm going to start off by stitching that bottom edge there to close that, and then we're going to continue on around all of the other edges of the hemband. So we will end up with all 4 edges of the hemband top stitched. Now actually when I'm doing this, I find it's easier to have the sleeve turned inside out. That's just something I've discovered along the way, doing many of these jackets. So turning your jacket sleeve inside out will help you to get this done easier. It's just easier maneuvering. Now when you are sewing this, you can feel along here with your finger to make sure that the fold underneath is in the right spot. So as you go along, just slide your finger along and you can kind of feel it out and know whether it's shifted. So I can feel it right there. I know I'm in the right spot. And when I get to the edge here, I'm going to keep sewing to the corner, and we'll pivot and we'll go all the way around, continue top stitching. I do find it's hard on the corners sometimes because it doesn't want to grab. So you might need to use your hand wheel to move it along for a couple of stitches before it grabs. There we go. Okay, there's our sleeve hem done. So you can see my top stitching. I'll just turn it the other way around so you can see it properly. My top stitching is done for my sleeve hem. So when you put it together properly, this is what it will look like. I'll just pop my pin in there. So we will have either a denim button or a denim snap that will go in that little spot there to keep these two together. I just love the way that the two-piece sleeve on this jacket looks. Particularly, I've never done actually the contrasting panels before, but that looks really cool. So that's our sleeve hem done on one side. I'm going to repeat that exact same method on this sleeve hem on the other side, and I might speed this up so you don't have to watch me doing it in real time. And that is our second sleeve hem band done. So just going to pin that one as well. Make sure it's all lining up beautifully. I love the satisfaction of seeing this pattern come together. It is one of my favorite patterns to sew because as it comes together, it always blows my mind that we can make things like this with our own two hands. So there's our two sleeve hem bands done. The only sewing we have left to do now is the bottom band of the jacket. And I will grab that now, but you will see that this is constructed in exactly the same way as the sleeve hem bands. So the same process as we did before, just on a bigger piece of fabric. So first thing we need to do is fold up this bottom edge 3/8 of an inch and press it. Now I am eyeballing this, and then like I have done before, I will then check it with my hemming ruler and adjust as needed, but I just find it quicker to start off with an eyeball. Let's see how I did on this one. Pretty good. Now you would have seen, as I went along here, that on the unironed edge I have a few notches. They are just to help me to line up the pattern pieces. Oops, I haven't been checking this bit, have I? That's just to help me to line it up as I'm attaching to the jacket. So that's the edge of the button placket, that's the side seam, that's the center back. So I will use those when I'm attaching it to the jacket. But you might have noticed that I've got them on one half and not on the other half, because this pattern is cut on the fold, but they are on the right side of the fabric. So I do still have them, just on the other side. So the next step is that we're going to fold this over. Now you need this, we're folding this in half. So if you unfold, you can see it's in half, but we want to sew this short edge with that folded side, that folded edge up like we did with the sleeve hemband. So I'm just folding the short edge over, and I'm going to stitch down that short edge, and then I'm going to do exactly the same on this short edge here. We have got stitching there. You can see I kept that folded. Now we're going to clip the corners and turn it right sides out, just like we did with the hemband, the sleeve hembands. And then we are going to press this. So it's a bit tricky to show you because I can't get this whole hemband in the shot, but we have done this exact same technique with the sleeve hemband, so you should know how to do it from that. So I'm just pressing. Again, this little gap between the fold and the raw edge needs to be 3/8 of an inch. So if something has gone a little bit wonky, you can just correct that. And the reason for that is that when you sew your hemband on, it's going to help you to line it up when you're doing your top stitching. I'm trying not to press where the notches are here because I don't want them to disappear. And then I won't have them to help me with the placement. Let me stitch it on. Whoops. Okay. So now we are ready to pin this to our jacket. Now, as we have done before, we are going to be pinning the raw edge, and we're going to start at one edge of the bottom placket here. So we'll line up that folded edge with the edge of the button placket on our jacket. I'm just going to pin that right there, making sure the folds are exactly lined up there on the edge. Now this notch should be on the edge where our stitching line is for the button placket. So we'll pin that in place. Now this next notch is our side seam notch. So we'll make sure that's lined up. And again, we'll pin that. And then I'm just going to pin in between them. Now, if you added a welt pocket to your jacket, when you're pinning here, make sure all of those layers of your welt pocket are in your pinning, because you want to make sure that they're enclosed in this hemband when you are sewing. Now, if you want, you can fold here your back piece to get a center back that you can then match to the notch on your hemband, just to make sure everything is going on accurately, and then pin between the notches. And then there's the little, oh, that one disappeared. Oh no, I'm just going to have to guess this. So I'm going to pin the end, as my notches seem to have disappeared when I was ironing this part. So I will start by pinning the end, and then I will distribute it evenly. It's not the end of the world if these notches disappear, as long as your ends are both lined up and everything else is distributed evenly, then it'll work out just fine. Okay, now that our hemband is all pinned on, we are going to sew that onto the jacket. So when you start, make sure that the two edges are exactly on top of each other there. Pull the top part of the hemband out of the way so that you can sew those on. And as we're sewing the front part of the jacket, be really careful to make sure that all of those welt pocket pieces are staying in place as well. Okay, and again at the end, I'm holding that top piece of the hemband out of the way so that I can sew right up to the edge here without catching it in my stitching. Now that the hemband is all sewn on, we are now going to press it, just like we did with the sleeve band. So we'll tuck all of these little bits in. I'm going to clip these corners again. And then tuck all those bits in and press the hemband in place. Clip those corners again. Got to be so careful when you're clipping corners, especially when you get so far into your sewing as to be at this point now, because if you accidentally cut somewhere up here, you're going to be devastated. So just be really careful. And I'm saying that because I almost did it just then. And I would have been so upset with myself if I had. Okay, now that that hemband is pressed, I'm just going to pop some pins in, and then I will transfer them to the other side for my sewing. Just make sure you tuck in all those corners on the edges, so you don't want any exposed edges there. Okay, now I'm flipping it over to the right side, and I'm just going to transfer my pins to the right side of the fabric here, because I will be top stitching this just like the other parts. I'll be top stitching it with the right side up. Okay, now that I've done that, I'm going to go ahead and stitch the hemband on. So we're going to sew along this edge first to enclose all of those open edges. Then we're going to go around just like we have previously and finish those other 3 edges with top stitching. My hemband is all top stitched. Now that could be the end of the sewing for this jacket, but there is one last thing that you can add if you want to, and this is not a necessary step, but if you want to, you can now add some hem tabs. Now what the hem tabs look like, this is one that I have partly sewn together. So I should say, what you do for your hem tabs is you place your hem tab fabric right sides together, like so, and then you stitch around these edges, like I have done here. So I'm going to just clip the corners now so that we can turn it right sides out, and I can show you how to attach it. Turn your hem tab right side out. And I'll get my little, oops, my clip and glide. I'm just pushing out all of the corners now. So we're going to now iron this. And I'm going to top stitch around these edges. I'm not going to bother with that edge. You'll see why in a minute. Okay, so once you've got both of your hem tabs sewn, your next step is to fold over the edge 3/8 of an inch and press. I like to clip the corners here to reduce a bit of the bulk. And then we're going to attach it to our hemband. So the way that you position your hembands is to put this folded edge in line with your side seam. So pop that right there in line with your side seam, pin it in place, and then you're just going to stitch it down by stitching right along that fold, and then another line of stitching 1/4 of an inch across from that. So we'll put one of our hembands on that side, the other one will attach here on this side, and we'll stitch those on now. So as I mentioned, first row of stitching is going to go as close as possible to this folded edge here. And when I get to the bottom, I like to stitch just along the line of the top stitching to get across to the other row of top stitching. So that's one hemband stitched in place. I'll do the other one now. Okay, that's our other little hem tab in place. Now the only sewing left to do is if you want to add any decorative patches or labels to your sewing. Okay, so I have decided to add this handmade faux leather label to the back of my jacket. So I'm just going to position it here right in the center of my jacket. Now, because this is a faux leather label, if I pin it, it will leave holes in the label. So I've just got to carefully hold it in the right spot while I bring it over to my machine to sew. So I'm just going to line it up again right there. Now I do have a size label under here. Okay, no, it's not in the way. All right, so I'm going to stitch this on carefully. If you like the way that this faux leather label looks, you can find a whole range of them in our Tadah store, which are perfect to adding to your street jackets. They're also really great on the everyday overalls as well. Okay, so my label is on. My jacket is completely finished sewing. The only thing that I have left to do now is to trim off all my threads and to add my denim hardware. So I'll show you how to do that now. Okay, so it seems I jumped the gun a little bit and I forgot that we actually do have some more sewing to do, which is our buttonholes. Now, if you choose to do denim snaps for the front of your jacket, then you will be able to avoid doing buttonholes. But I've decided that I'm going to use buttons on the front of my jacket. So first thing I do is I use my awl to just poke a hole through each of the button placement spots on my button placement pattern piece. So once I have done that for each of the spots, I then lay it on my pattern piece. So you line up the bottom with the bottom edge of your hemband, and then you just mark your button. Sorry, so that's lined up. I didn't realize I cut that off. That's lined up with the bottom edge of your hemband, and then I just use my friction pen and I go through the hole to mark the button placement. So you can see that's marked there. I'm then going to do that for all of the others. There we go. Now I know that to get my buttonholes the right size and sewn so that they're in the middle of the button placket, I need to start them 3/8 of an inch from the edge. Now I know this because I've tested my buttonholes on my machine with the size of buttons that I'm using, and then I measured it against my button placket. So I've tested that beforehand, and I know I'm going to start 3/8 of an inch in, so that's why I've marked that, and I've got my placement marks so I know exactly where I'm going to be doing my buttons. Okay, time to sew my buttonholes on. Okay, now that my buttonholes are done, I'm just going to pop a little bit of fray stop in the middle of each one. And then I am going to use my buttonhole cutter to open up these buttonholes. So, on my fray stop, now I'm using my buttonhole cutter. And just carefully. Okay, they're all done. So now I'm going to pop my denim jacket together. I'll put the buttonholes on top, and what I do to position my buttons in the right spot is that I just go through the buttonhole and I draw a line with my pen in that spot. Now the reason I'm just going to mark where my buttons are going to go with a cross. Okay, now we're going to attach our denim buttons. Now your denim buttons come with two parts. So there's this part here, that is the nail, and then this part, which is the button head. So first thing you need to do is get your awl and poke a hole through your fabric where you want your button to go. So you poke a hole straight through, and then starting from the wrong side, you're going to push your denim button nail, just move those threads, through the hole from the back to the front. Okay, so you can see the nail now is going from the back to the front. Now what we do is we grab our anvil with the rounded side up and our denim button, And you need to pay attention. Well, you don't have to, but I like to pay attention to the orientation of the words. So I put Tadah at the top and the handmade at the bottom. So I'm going to place it down that way. I'm paying attention to which way it was oriented so that I know which way the words will be when I put my button on. So the nail then is going to go into that little hole at the top of the button. So we'll pop that in there, and I'm just going to hold it in place while I grab my hammer and gently tap on the top of the nail. Now you want to do this with a series of small taps rather than just one or two big ones. Just gently tapping it in. And then when you think you've got it, just have a little check, give it a tug, make sure it's in there nice and securely. I've got a little bit of a gap there between the fabric and the button head, so I'm just going to give it a bit more of a whack. There we go. Now it's in nice and tight. And you can see that I've got the Tadah at the top and then the handmade at the bottom. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Go ahead and do that for my other 4 remaining buttons. All right, there we go. All of our denim buttons have been attached. Now I am going to get my iron out so that I can iron these little lines here to make them disappear. The only other thing I have left to do now is attach to these hem bands, the hem tabs, and my pockets. Now you can do this with the same denim buttons that you've used on the front here, but I like to use denim snaps for this part, so I can show you how to do that now too. Okay, so your denim snaps have 4 pieces. You have the cap, which is the rounded part that's going to be visible on the outside of your garment. You have the socket, which is the other part that goes with the cap, so they'll be together on the outer piece of fabric. Then you've got the stud and you've got the post. So the stud and the post go together, and that's on the lower piece of fabric. So first thing I do when I'm doing denim snaps is I get my anvil, and the reason I use a tapered anvil like this is because this post is actually quite thick and a tapered awl, because this post is actually quite thick, and so a regular awl doesn't have the thickness to be able to get this through, whereas this one you can push it through as far as you want to get the I guess like bigger size of the hole. So I'm doing snaps on my sleeve hem bands. So what I'm going to do is, just move those out of the way for a second. I'm going to push my awl through all of the layers here. So I'll line them up exactly where I want them to be. And now I'm going to do it just here in the middle of the band, like centered this way, and about 1/2 inch in this way. I'm just going to poke it through all of the layers. You can see it's coming out there. I'm going to make a decent sized hole in this one. Now, starting off with the lower fabric, I'm going to push my post through from the wrong side of the fabric to the right side. See how the hole's not quite big enough there? So I've got to push my awl through even further to make the hole quite big. So as I was saying, this post is quite thick, so it's hard to get it through. So there we go, we've got the post through. The post goes with the stud, so I'll pop the stud on top, and then we're going to use the side of the anvil that has these ridges. So we'll pop that down on top, and with your snap kits, the starter kits, you'll get your snap setting tool. So you just put the pointy end of the snap setting tool into the middle of the post, and we're just going to tap really gently. And as I was saying with the denim buttons, you want to do lots of small taps rather than a few really big ones. So then I just check that it's all attached properly. It's quite firm. I'm just going to give it a couple of extra taps. Okay, that's looking good. Now for the other side. So through our hole here, just going to make sure it's big enough. Starting on the outside of the fabric this time, I'm going to push my cap through that hole. So from the outside, and this time we're going to turn the anvil over and use the flat side. So we'll pop our cap down there, we'll put our socket over the top, and then again using the pointy end of the snap setting tool, we'll pop it just in the middle there and give it some gentle taps. See, that's now attached, so I can pop my snaps together, and that makes a cute little finish to the bottom of the sleeve band. So I'm going to go ahead and do that on the other sleeve. Okay, that's the other sleeve done. Now I'm going to do my pockets. Okay, now we've got snaps on our front pockets and our sleeve bands. The last thing to do is attach them to our hem bands here. All right, my hardware is on. I'm going to go and trim some threads and I'll be back. Our gorgeous street jacket is finished. I love all the little details on this pattern, from the plackets on the sleeve, my little label, the little peep of floral in the welt pockets, all of the top stitching on the front of it. I really think that the denim hardware elevates this to a whole new level. And then when you flip it over, that fun little leather patch on the back, the peep of floral under the collar as well. It's such a fun pattern to make and such amazing results. So I hope you've enjoyed this sew along, and I hope you have fun making your own street jacket.